Greetings, everyone, and welcome to today's SMPTE Meeting Outcomes Summary Webcast. We're going to talk about what happened at our recent SMPTE standards meetings, but also our speakers are going to talk a bit about the SMPTE Liaison process, and they're going to go into it quite deeply, actually. So let's begin. I am your host, Joel Welch, SMPTE's Director of Education. I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping right now, so please bear with me. And there is one of our speakers right now. Hello, Bruce Devlin. How are you?
I am muted. Now, hopefully, I am unmuted. How are you?
I am well. I am well. For our guests, if you're new to this series of webcasts, we try to do them quarterly. These meetings, these webcasts are complimentary to everybody, and we post them on SMPTE's website. If you go to Education, and there will be a on-demand webcast on-demand link. You go to that, and you'll see another link to the SMPTE webcast. They're also posted on YouTube. If you participate in social media, please tweet, post, Snap, whatever it is you do, and our handle is at SMPTE Connect and hashtag SMPTE Webcast. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce your two speakers, Mr. Bruce Devlin. He is SMPTE's Standards Vice President, and my teammate on SMPTE staff is Mr. Thomas Bause. He is Director of Standards Development. With that, gentlemen, I am going to turn the floor over to you, and I will remain silent until the question period.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. So today we're going to be going through the recent set of meetings that we had in Geneva. I'll take you through probably the first 45 minutes, 50 minutes, explaining what we've done within the standards community. And then I'll hand over to Thomas, who will then take us through the liaisons process and what we do in liaisons. Do you want to give us just a little flavor of what you're going to tell us about, Thomas?
Well, yeah, it's going to be a little bit of an explanation of the liaison process, and then we're going to talk about a few organizations we are involved with and we are working together with.
Excellent. So without further ado, we shall crack on. I will turn off my webcam so that the audio has a slim chance of getting across the damp piece of string that passes for internet in the place where I live. So it's a bit of lag. There we go. So we've just had our SMPTE block meetings at the EBU in Geneva. For those of you who've been to the EBU in Geneva, it's an outstanding facility, and the EBU really does look after us very, very well. This is the total number of people who turned up on site, looking all very excited and full of sandwiches and other things that were given for lunch. Big thank you to Hans Hoffman here on the right-hand side of your screen. Not only is Hans one of the leading lights of the EBU and responsible for organizing everything so that we could be there, but he's also the finance director of SMPTE, so he keeps us straight. So thank you very much to him. So we have Barbara on the left here, who's our executive director, with her hand appropriately positioned to try and make Matthew Goldman silent. I don't think she succeeded, but he's doing quite well. Carissa, if you've not met Carissa, Carissa looks after all the editing of our documents and gets them out. A few other famous names, you probably recognize Chris Lennon, Mr. BXF, me, Mr. MXF, Bob Edge, long-term standards director, Peter Symes, formerly the main man at head office, Thomas, outdoing Peter, well done Thomas, who's our Director of Standards and Engineering, looking after everything, and a few other famous faces, including Pat Griffiths, our current Executive Vice President. So, at the EBU, we met between the 19th and the 22nd of September. The weather was absolutely glorious, and the wonderful EBU gave us a nice evening reception where we got to drink some wine and eat very low-calorie food while looking over the Jura and the other mountains of Geneva, which was just lovely. But when we weren't doing that, we were doing a whole bunch of work. There were 9 technology committees, the TCs that met, and 13 subgroups. We had participants from all the way around the world, and as you can see, we've got representatives from Bulgaria, from America, from Switzerland, from Australia, from the UK, America, just all the way around the world. The meeting outcome report isn't quite baked yet. It will be at that URL or at the meeting reports URL relatively soon. And you can download in absolute minuscule detail the status of all the documents, for which I'm going to give you a high-level overview today. The meetings themselves butt straight up against IBC. So literally IBC ends on the Tuesday at about 4 o'clock. People jump on planes either that evening or the following morning, and we start work in Geneva at Wednesday lunchtime. So we keep going for about 3.5 days. So that means going through until the Saturday. There were 59 people on site, and overall we had over 100 people who join in by the various means, via WebEx, telephone call, or whatever. And at the moment we have 185 active projects on the go. In other words, there's 185 documents, give or take a couple, that are actively flowing through the standards community, which is pretty busy. And since the last quarter, we published 13 documents. Given that there are 3 months in a quarter, and there are 4 weeks in a month, give or take a bit, that's 3 fours are, let me say, fingers and toes, 3 fours are 12. So that's more than a document a week. So, the committees really are busy, and all credit to head office. I mean, it takes a lot to get these documents through and out and searchable by Google. So this is a busy, busy time. Did I miss anything, Thomas? Anything you want to say about the wonderful EBU?
No, I think you nailed it. So it's just always a pleasant place to be.
It absolutely is. So a quick reminder about our standards structure. So at the top, we have the standards vice president, who's basically in charge of making sure the ship's going in a good direction. I'm a volunteer. Thomas, the director of standards development and engineering, is part of SMPTE staff. And whilst I stand at the top and wave my hands around, Thomas does actually all the hard work. So really, he's the guy that does the hard work, and I'm just the guy waving at the top.
Sometimes.
Hopefully things are going in a good direction. We basically have a structure where the standards committee meets to make certain that all of our processes are done well, and where necessary, we introduce more process and delete process that's not necessary. And we have a bunch of documents called our administrative guidelines, which just yesterday ended up on a public URL. So slightly too soon for me to be able to give you the link, but we'll try and share the link in some of the text that we distribute after this webinar. But you can now find our administrative guidelines online, just the same way that you can find our operations manual online. And these are basically the rules that we have to follow. And those rules say that we will have a number of technology committees. Those technology committees will have a chair, and pretty much the standards committee, the overseeing committee, is made up of the TC chairs, 4 standards directors that I get to appoint, any subgroups of the standards committee, those chairs can be there, delegated experts, the previous SVP, and the staff involved in standards. So this is the overseeing committee that looks after everything. And then below that, we have the actual technology committees themselves. So the green ones look after content, essence and metadata. So that's 10E essence and 30MR metadata and registers. Then we've got some technology committees that look at specific applications. So film, that plastic stuff you shine lights through, digital cinema, television and broadcast, and cinema sound. And then we've got the infrastructure technology committees. These are the TCs that look after, the low-level stuff that makes it all work. So file formats and systems, networks and facilities, media systems and control, and package and media. And what we're going to do for about the next 40 minutes is just go through the work of each one of those committees. And these committees represent 840 members from over 350 companies with, I should say 185, I forgot to update this slide, with 185 active projects, 95 groups, members from 34 different countries, and overall we have 10 technology committees. Anything you want to add, Thomas?
No, maybe only that this is, and I think you mentioned it actually before, this is all driven by volunteers. It's a volunteer organization. There's a very slim staff, just basically 4 or 5 people who are involved in the standards development side of things. And other than that, it's all driven by volunteers.
It absolutely is. And we thank those volunteers enormously because a lot of work gets done to put out 1 document a week continually for years. That's a lot of work. So, quick question for the audience, and Joel's going to be putting up a poll at the end of the formal bit of the presentation to ask you about what we're going to put in the next standards webinar. So in each one of these webinars, we take you through the work that we do, and then we do like a special half hour or special 20 minutes at the end. And about a year ago, we decided that we're going to alternate what we put at the end. So this time round, it's a deep dive into one of the sort of the general technology areas, especially one of the areas that might be cross-committee. So the 3 that I chose, and as the SVP I get to choose, would you like the next webcast to include a deep dive in activities around SMPTE 2110? So that's video and audio over IP. So this is predominantly the work of Technology Committee 32, but there's also metadata involved, there's also file formats, there's essence formats, so it covers elements of 10E, it covers elements of 31FS, and it covers elements of 30MR, and it covers elephants from the audio group as well. So it properly is one of SMPTE's flagship cross-TC hot topics of the moment. The next one that we could talk about, one of my specialities, is IMF, which is, if you like, the file format hot topic equivalent of the IP live streaming hot topic. So again, this is all about how do we create multi-version packages in the world. It's predominantly in Technology Committee 35PM, but it also impacts file formats, 31FS, impacts metadata, 30MR. It impacts the cross-disciplinary work that's happening in Cinema, 21DC, Cinema Sound, 25CSS, and really does touch every single bit of SMPTE. And the third option is about microservices. This is a kind of new activity, but essentially this is happening in Technology Committee 34CS, and we're looking at creating a register of microservices that touch all different aspects of broadcasting and cinema. And so it's more than just the command and control, because actually the things you're commanding and controlling will be covered by every single one of SMPTE's technology committees. So these are the 3 options, and we'll ask you at the end to take a vote on one of these 3 different options so that we can give you a good show in 3 months' time. So let's get cracking then. I usually start off with a review of the new projects that got kicked off at this meeting cycle. And we had such a lot of new projects this time around, I couldn't even fit the bottom half of the SMPTE logo in. So I'll give you a quick overview of all of these, and then I'll pause to take some questions if anybody's got questions. And once we've done the new projects, then we'll go into each TC one by one. So the first new project is in 10E, so that's the Essence Technology Committee. And this is an update of video compression format number 5. That's the Cineform codec. And part 2 needs to be revised because the metadata part, which is just going through committee at the moment, introduced some new metadata elements that caused the core spec to have a bit of an update. Next new project is in 21DC, Digital Cinema. And this is an update to some of the subtitling provisions being led by a team in Japan. Now that we've got good subtitle representation in TTML for Japanese subtitles, we're going to update 428 Part 7 to carry forward some of those updates that have taken place in other standards organizations. The next two are in the Cinema Sound Technology Committee. The first is a study group on the B-chain characteristics and expectations. B-chain being speaker placement and all the cables and all that other stuff. And with all the work that's being done on immersive audio, this study group is going to be looking at those sorts of issues. Or at least I hope they are. I'm not an expert in this area, so we'll find out. The next one is on ST 2098 Part 2. So this is a standard that's just been published literally in this meeting cycle, and the first thing that the guys did is open it up for a revision. This is the fundamental bitstream definition for immersive audio. And the strategy and the tactics that the team are doing is to get the baseline specification out there rather than wait for years and make it perfect. And once the baseline spec's out there, then they're going to revise it with some of the metadata and results from some of the other studies that are ongoing. The next one is an RDD on professional metadata. Now, I don't have many details on that one, so I can't tell you much about that, and that's going through 30MR, I believe. And the next one is an RDD, basically an RDD formalization, an RDD formalization of a specification known as AMWA AS07, which is an archive specification promoted by the Library of Congress for using Mxf to store archive variants of broadcasts. The next bunch are all in 32NF, networks and facilities. So these two are related, that we're putting forward 2110 Part 41, which is an IP transport of arbitrary synchronized metadata. So those of you from an SDI background, think about the way that you put data in VANC packets. Now, whilst you can do that in IP, it seems a bit crazy to synchronize your metadata by putting it in a VANC packet and burying it in the video, or burying it in a separate VANC track. Why not just take the metadata itself and put it in a separate RDP packet and synchronize it that way around? So this part 41 is the basic synchronization mechanism for arbitrary metadata. And part 42 is the first use of that, which is to take the SDP object, which describes the sender of data in SMPTE 2110, and that SDP data structure is going to be sent as its own RDP packet using this fast metadata or FMX structure, and going to be an independent synchronized RDP stream within the ST 2110 family. The next one is a security study of PTP, chaired by Thomas Bause-Mason. Good on you, Thomas. And we're specifically looking at security issues in and around PTP. We didn't want to broaden the scope too far because the project would never finish if we did that. So we're just constraining it to looking at how PTP might affect the security of a SMPTE 2110 system, or the security of the PTP system, and then the knock-on effects of that. There's a one-year review of SMPTE 2110 Part 10, which is the system design document. Every document that SMPTE publishes, after 1 year, we review it. And so this is coming up for its 1 year review. And to do a review, we have to do work. And to do work, you need a project. So that's pretty much why this project exists. Then we've got a report, which is essentially a guideline to help designers of SMPTE 2059 or PTP systems within SMPTE 2110 using 2022 Part 7 redundancy. What are the good design guides in using or putting those standards together? So there's a project being started to look very specifically at that use case, and the output will be a report. Now we've got an SDI one. Ultra high definition SDI was designed somewhat differently to HD and SD SDI, in that the stress patterns for SD and HD involve flat fields and distinct chroma changes. Those were designed out in UHD, so the stress patterns and the pathological signals for UHD SDI are quite different. And so this group is looking at what pathological signals do you need for UHD SDI. And the final bunch of projects are all coming out of 35PM. And 35 PM is using Git to track issues that are found in the documents as part of Plugfests. And so as a result, what we've ended up doing is revising a whole bunch of documents at the same time, because the document maintenance group looks at the issues that have been identified as a result of Plugfests and discussions on the Git repository or the Git issues tracker. And these documents, the application 4, which is the cinema archive, the essence component, which is part 5, the composition playlist, which is part 3, application 2E, which is IMF J2K applications of IMF, and the core constraints. All of these documents are being revised as a part of that process. So I'll just pause for a second there, because that was a bit of a long and unwieldy monologue. And when I turn my little webcam on, or when Joel turns his webcam on, that's an opportunity for you to ask questions or to unmute. And Joel, because I'm looking at the camera, not looking at the chat, if there's anything in the chat, I'd be really grateful if you could read it out.
And that is what I will do. There is one question in there, and I will remind our guests that to please type in your questions in the question box, or we prefer to have an oral question if you have one, and just say, I'd like to ask an oral question. The question that we have in the queue is from Howard Luck, and Howard asks, would fast metadata carry timestamps?
That is a brilliant question, and one that I'm probably not qualified to answer, because the interaction of the time labeling group and the fast metadata group has not been defined within the committees yet. Although, as you can imagine, Howard, there is some heated and protracted discussion going on in that area. Maybe Thomas, who's more of an expert than me in this area, do you have any concrete knowledge, Thomas, or are we putting on our Kevlar suits and leaving it to the committees to tell us something next time?
I could make some assumptions, I guess, right? And given that a separate stream, it will be wrapped in RTP, yep. And every RTP package, by nature, I would say, has a timestamp. So, in addition, I would think that you would like to synchronize this metadata stream with an accompanying associated video audio stream. In that moment, the way how you do that is through a timestamp in the RTP header. So my assumption would be yes, there should be a timestamp in there.
Yep, I think that's probably as much as we can say at the moment. That within the RTP environment, there will definitely be timestamps. Whether a SMPTE timestamp is going to end up as a payload, I'm not a betting man. I'm going to wait for 3 months before I even bother to think about that.
Okay, next question comes from our good friend Gary. Going back to the org chart, where does the new specifications group sit on the chart?
What a brilliant question. And am I in charge of this?
You are in charge. I can fix it if you'd like.
No, there we go. Let me just in fact, let's do it this way. That is a good question, Gary. So let me just pull that up. So I will talk a little bit about specifications later, but I'm not going to go into any great detail because the specifications process was only finalized on the 11th of September. And that didn't give me quite enough time with IBC and Geneva being in the way to give you enough details for today. But essentially, the specifications process is almost exactly half the standards process. And the standards process basically starts with a project coming to the standards vice president, and the standards vice president then says, well, we need to allocate this to a specific technology committee based on the subject that the specification is going to cover. So the first specification was an IMF application. So obviously that will have gone to TC35 PM. And all the work took place within TC35 PM. Now, the main difference between a specification and a standard is that part of the process to make a standard is what's known as the pre-FCD review, which involves the technology committee reviewing the document to see if there's any problems with it before we go into the formal ballot. Now, we do that step in the specifications process, and in the specifications process, at that point, the technology committee and the proponents request the standards vice president, i.e. me, to make the document public at that point. And that's a technical specification. And at that point, it goes for public comment. And if you go to github.com/SMPTE, or you go to SMPTE.org/technical specifications, you'll have all the links to the first of the technical specifications, and you can go to the issue tracker and you can add your own comments, whether you're a SMPTE member or not, on those particular documents. And so essentially, a specification is half a standard that goes out for public scrutiny and public comment at the point where it would normally go into the standards process for vote. And what we're hoping to do is that early stage technologies will go through the specifications process, have some public scrutiny, maybe have 2 or 3 reference implementations put together, and then come back into the standards process for standardization. And there will be stronger, better, more agilely developed standards because people will have had a chance to do reference implementations and find the bugs before we commit to standard v1.0. Well, hopefully I answered your question there, Gary. And I'll just wait for Joel to see if there's any more.
And that is our final question for this period.
Excellent. And with that, I will vanish my face and try and click through to the next slide. Apologies if I'm speaking slowly. There's about a 5-second lag, so it's hard to know how many times I've clicked. So the first of the technology committees is 10E. 10E looks after Essence, and it's chaired by John Snow and Michael Zink. So I've mentioned the new project, which is about the update of VC5. The first set of projects are all compression projects. So the first compression project is VC6, which now has a number, SMPTE 2117. We're currently drafting that. In fact, we've literally just 30 minutes ago come off a drafting meeting. We've been talking about the fine details of that. And we're expecting that we should have an FCD ballot of VC6 before the end of the year. And a reference decoder is going to be provided as part of that work. VC5, also SMPTE 2073, commonly known as Cineform or the GoPro codec. The final part of that, which is the metadata part, is just about ready for FCD ballot. It's in its pre-FCD review now. And as a result, part 2, as we've mentioned above, needs a bit of revision because there's been some updates to it as a result of this work. And VC2, the Dirac codec, part 3, the conformance, has been updated to cover some of the UHD high dynamic range. That should be wide color gamut, not wide bunny gamut, WCG modes. That's in process as a result of some of the updates due to hybrid log gamma being one of the modes that Dirac supports. More work within 10E. We have the reference display work. Part 2, which is measurement and calibration, there's a revision in progress, and there's still lots of debate about line numbering because it covers lots of different rasters, and anyone who's an expert in rasters knows that deciding on how the line numbers work is always much more difficult than you think because of lots of legacy constraints and trying to make it uniform and nice. Part 4, the full measurement and calibration document. The document required a bit of a fix. There was some maths problems, if I remember correctly, that didn't display properly, and the FCD ballot's been restarted. The television lighting consistency index, in other words, a magic number that tells you how good your lighting consistency is, that's in its second pre-FCD review. That should start in about 4 weeks' time. Or it's estimated that the second pre-FCD review will start in 4 weeks' time. 2086, the mastering display color volume metadata, that was published in the last quarter. The P3 Colorimetry, because remember, there's no standard for P3 at the moment, even though it appears in all sorts of workflows. This standard is intended to fix that. It's been through FCD ballot, and the pre-DP vote has started and is in progress while we speak. SMPTE 2115, FS gamut and log characteristics of camera systems, that's currently in FCD ballot as we speak. And there's a study group on virtual reality and augmented reality. There was a big debate in Geneva on the scope of the report because there's lots of different groups out there like the VR Industry Forum and the VR Association that all have different specialities. And so we're trying to figure out what's the best report that SMPTE can write that adds value from SMPTE. And one of the things we thought of was, why don't we write down the things that don't change? In other words, what are the bits of the SMPTE standard suite that you can reuse in a VR and AR environment? So that discussion is currently ongoing. At that point, I will pause and ask if there are any questions on Technology Committee 10E.
We do have one question, and it is from Howard. His question is, P3 Colorimetry is in pre-DP review, not vote?
I think it's in pre-DP review. I think the vote is due to start in a day or two, but I might have got my timing wrong because I copied the notes from a couple of days ago, so I might have just missed that thing in my inbox. It's either the vote's either just started or it's in pre-DP review. Howard, if you have to ask, you're probably right because you're paying more attention than me.
And he responds, thank you. That is our final question for this period.
Cool. Let's click the button. The next technology committee is 20F, which is the Film Technology Committee. The Film Committee tends not to meet on the same schedule as the rest of the committees. It's chaired by John Miller and Dave Schnelly, and I believe that they tend to meet more in line with the film conferences rather than in line with the TV and digital conferences. The next committee is 21DC, All Things Digital Cinema, chaired, or soon to be chaired, because he's volunteered, by Steve Lamb and Chris Witham. That's a little bit of a pre-announcement there. So the projects in 21DC, as I've mentioned already, there's a new subtitle project that's kicking off. The current projects involve SMPTE 428 Part 1, which is image characteristics of DCDM. That's in pre-DP review. And 429 Part 2. Now, this is an interesting one where there are two different orthogonal changes to the document taking place, one to do with frame rates and one to accommodate stereoscopic subtitles. This revision actually became an amendment to make it go through faster and is now in pre-DP review. The other is a revision, full revision, because it's a more invasive change to the document, and that is currently in pre-FCD review. So these two are sort of going through in parallel. The hope is that by the time they get published, either this amendment will amend the existing published document or it will amend the new document. Either way, the way it's written is kind of orthogonal, and we'll sort it all out when we get to publication, we hope. Next one is a revision of SMPTE 429 Part 4, which is JPEG 2000 in DCP Mxf, and that's currently still undergoing FCD comment resolution. There's been a bunch of work in this committee and in 25CSS on immersive audio, and the big document that's managed to unblock all of that work is 2098 Part 2. And as a result of that one being unblocked in the last quarter, a lot of these documents which are on hold have now made it to pre-FCD review. So that includes the Screen Management System Outboard Media Block Communications Protocol. I'm sure that that was the simplest title they could have chosen. Likewise, the reference method for the same thing, SMS OMB, easier to say. And as a result of that, these changes and 2098 Part 2, it's likely that SMPTE 430 Part 14 is going to need an update, and that's a digital sync method for putting auxiliary data into the system. Operational constraints for immersive audio, that's in pre-FCD, immersive audio track file, also in pre-FCD, and an RDD on the Dolby Atmos Bitstream specification that is now ready for publication. Final couple of projects in 21DC is immersive audio, FSK sync signal for immersive audio, and key delivery mechanism for immersive audio. Again, these documents are kind of dependent on 2098 Part 2, and those are now in pre-FCD review as a result of 2098 Part 2 getting to the end of its publication cycle. And with that, I'll see if there's any questions on 21DC.
And the number of questions in our queue is zip, not a zero.
Excellent. So moving on before Howard reaches the unmute button. 24TB is the next one. So this is television and broadband media, and the chair of that committee is Bill Miller. So a number of ongoing projects in this committee. The first is 2064, which is AV sync measurement. This has already been published and is now parts 1 and 2, which is fingerprint generation and transport. Those are now ready for their 1-year review, and hopefully those won't require any kind of update, and those will just slip straight through. There's an engineering guideline which has emerged or is emerging from the drafting committee, ready for its pre-FCD review. So that hopefully will go into the committee and start its pre-FCD review soon. Open binding of IDs. Those have been through the entire publication. They have been published, and there's been some great demonstrations of that work at IBC. The final one is 2016. This is active format description and bar data. Those are being updated for the various UHD modes that are required, and that's still currently in draft. So, any questions on 24TB?
There are no questions at the moment. I would like to remind our guests that we do welcome your questions at any time, so please queue your questions. Oral questions are preferred. You go right to the top of the list if you say, I have an oral question, and we will I'll unmute you, and you can talk right to Bruce and or Thomas.
Excellent, because if you don't unmute, you're going to listen to me for an hour, and I know how tedious that can be. So please unmute, ask me something interesting. Unless your name's Howard, in which case, be gentle. 25 CSS, Cinema Sound Systems Technology Committee. So as the title suggests, this is all things to do with cinema sound. The chairs are Brian Long and Bill Redmond. So this little one at the bottom there was throbbing at you. This is the 2098 Part 2, the Immersive Audio Bitstream Specification. There's been such an enormous amount of work done on this, and the guys have done a really good job. As I've already mentioned, this has just been published and has gone straight into immediate revision, but its publication has unblocked a whole bunch of other documents that depend on it, which have been waiting in the pipelines ready for this thing to go. So along with that one being published, the Immersive Audio Metadata has been published. The Immersive Audio Renderer Expectations, the drafting of this is now being restarted thanks to the publication of Part 2. Likewise, the interop testing document, the drafting has restarted as a result of Part 2 being published. There's also a study group being kicked off in the last quarter, which is the Immersive Audio Implementation. So the goal here really is to create, the report that's been published is now being made available to the TC members, and the group has now been disbanded because that report we believe is complete. I don't believe there's a need or a desire to publish this at the moment. The study group was really there to make certain that the rest of the standards get made well. I've mentioned the 2 existing new projects that have been kicked off, and I believe that's it for CSS. Any questions from any of the audience?
Let's see. This is again from Howard.
Good on you, Howard.
Howard says, congratulations on 2098-2. Huge amount of work, and we really welcome it here in the post world. Excellent.
Thank you for that, Howard. And yeah, I can't stress enough how important this document is. It was riddled with opportunities for failure, and the team bashed heads together, got agreement, and got the document out. I mean, it really is an outstanding piece of work. Awesome job, guys. Really impressed.
That is our final question.
Cool. So the next one is 30MR. 30MR is metadata and registers. The chairs are John Hurst and Mike DeValue. So within 30MR, there's a whole bunch of work going on to do with unique material identifier. There's a study group looking at applications of UMID. Work's going to restart on that, we hope, in this quarter. Likewise, a UMID resolution protocol. In other words, I've got this UMID. What does it point to? We need a protocol for doing that. And so work is likely to restart on that in the next quarter. The author of those documents is also the author of this document, which is the revision of ST330, which is the underlying UMID standard. He's been doing a bunch of work on that, and it's just about ready for pre-FCD review. There's also RP205, which is the UMID applications document. And again, that's waiting on this document to be finished so that the revision can bring this RP up to date to refer to the new ST330. If you've seen previous presentations from our standards updates, you'll remember that each register, whether it's a register for labels or a register for elements or a register for types, needs a defining document. One of the missing defining documents was the register of essence element keys. So an essence element is something like a JPEG 2000 frame, or a bunch of audio samples, or some compressed audio samples in HEVC for video or AAC for audio. So these essence element types need a register so that we know what their key structure is. And this defining document, ST2088, is the defining document that says how that register is structured, and that is currently in FCD document resolution. One of the older documents, which is the metadata element dictionary structure. So an element is something that has a value. So picture width has a value. You would find the picture width in the element dictionary. And this document defines how that dictionary is structured. And that's ready for ST audit now. So it's gone through its complete amendment and is now ready for ST audit, where we check that all the rules are done. And Thomas is the guy that looks after the ST audits. Thank you, Thomas. RP 2079, which is the Digital Object Identifier, Name and Entertainment ID, IDA Register Identifier, that has been published. So that's now available in the IEEE Explore store and is now off our books. Excellent. The registers themselves, with all of their values, we have a 6-monthly publishing cycle where it goes from in progress to draft to then published. The most recent version, codenamed Ponzu, has just been published, and the next variant, Tabasco, is just about to enter its 6-month publishing cycle. There's also a DG activity that is trying to remember the new essence element keys while we wait for this new register to be fixed or go through its complete process so that we can have a proper register to store all of these new values. So these new values are kind of being kept in an envelope on the editor's table until such time as we have a register to store them in officially. Now, the SMPTE metadata registers are free. That's a 4-letter word that begins with F, and you can find them at this URL here, SMPTERA.org. Go there, click on the metadata registers, and you can click on the published ones, the draft ones, and if you're in the standards community, you can click on the development, which is where all the submissions can be found and the status of those submissions and how the new registers are being created. The actual XML that we submit as a register entry creator can be found here, and the documentation for everything is found there. So if you need to do anything with registers, whether you're a developer, whether you're a document author, click on the documentation. There is loads of resources for free there. Please read them because the guys have worked so hard on this, and it's one of SMPTE's best technical online resources that we have. It really is an outstanding piece of work. Thank you to the team at the BBC who conceived of it, and thank you to everybody who's worked on it to make it a reality, because it really is an outstanding piece of work. So that's 30MR. Do we have any questions on 30MR?
As Yukon Cornelius famously quoted, nothing.
Nothing. Excellent. Moving on. The next technology committee is 31F, which is File Formats and Systems. And the chairs are Paul Gardner and Fred Walls. So there's a new project, which is the RDD Application Specification for Archival Preservation of Mxf, the core specification. So this has been in the public domain for a while, known as AMWA AS07, and it includes some really quite funky things like how you represent timecode. So if you've got an old tape which has been turned into an Mxf and has then become an Airmaster and has 117 different timecodes in, if you needed to archive that for posterity in your deep archive and wanted to remember what each of those timecodes were for and where they came from, this is the sort of document that gives you that level of detail. It really is an outstanding piece of work. It's been going on for a very long time. And the people responsible have really gone into, all the fine detail. The I's are dotted, the T's are crossed. It's quite a lengthy document, but it really is an outstanding document. So I'm really proud that this document has ended up in SMPTE as an RDD. Documents that are continuing to chug through the SMPTE process. First, the Mxf documents. There is a revision of ST377 Part 1, the material exchange format. This is the last update to 377 Part 1 that refers to the old register types, and that's waiting on the lazy SVP to actually finish the document, bundle it up, and put it through committee. And I have promised that I will try and get that done in the next quarter. It's a big bit of work, but I'm ready and up for it now. 377 Part 2 is the KLV extension syntax, where you can add in new elements into Mxf so that existing Mxf decoders can find them, know something about them, and present some meaningful information to a device without actually having to write new code. Really quite clever. That's been through FCD ballot. It's ready for DP vote, and we hope to see that published by the time we get to the December meetings in San Francisco. The next one is a revision of RP 2057, text-based metadata carriage in Mxf. There's 5 FCD comments, and that's waiting on me again to actually do some work. And I do apologize to the people waiting on that. This SVP lark is slightly busier than I thought it was going to be. The next one is 2042 Part 4, which is how do you map VC2, that's Dirac, into Mxf. That's been revised, and it's currently in pre-FCD review, and will be entering FCD ballot any time now. The archive exchange format has a second part of work that's going on, which is to do with external bundles and how do you reference those in a way that gives you good integrity in a deep archive. That's still being drafted, and they're going through some really quite interesting technical issues about how you do that external referencing and preservation. It's a good intellectual debate. Then we have the DPX format for high dynamic range. This is an outstanding piece of work again. I mean, there's been a lot of technical debate about how this should be done, how to keep backwards compatibility with existing DPX, and it's really been a labor of love by the drafting group. It's now already in pre-DP review. The guys have really worked hard on this, and so I'm really pleased to see this getting towards the end of its publication cycle. With that, I will ask, are there any questions on 31FS?
And there are no questions at the moment. However, I would like to remind our guests that your questions are indeed welcome. You can ask text questions, you can ask oral questions, and oral questions go immediately to the top of the list.
Thank you, Joel. 32NF is our Network and Facilities Technology Committee, and this is pretty much all things that you have to plug in. The chairs are Friedrich Gielinger. John Hudson has had to step down as chair, and we have an interim chair, Pat Waddell, at the moment, and many thanks to Pat for stepping in while I try and find a new chair for 32NF. And if you are an up-and-coming standards participant and you want to experience what it's like to be a chair, please give me a bell and I will happily talk to you about whether or not being a chair of 32NF might be right for you. So let's jump into 32NF's work. There's a bunch of new projects that was already pointed out. So this is all things SMPTE 2110, PTP, and SDI. So we've already talked about the new projects. Projects that are ongoing. The first one is the EG 2111 series. You'll have seen some of these actually appear in the journal if you're a recipient of the journal. So those big wall charts that you get that show how all of the UHD SDI formats fit together on SDI, those are the EG 2111 series of posters. And again, this is a massive labor of love. The guys that have done these standards really have tried to make the information accessible and provide you with the information in a way that's really easy so that you can put these posters up inside your design teams, whether or not you're building systems or building products, and be able to look at stuff and give yourself that easy aid memoir to make the SMPTE content accessible. So a massive round of applause to those guys. They've really worked very, very hard. And by guys, I do mean guys and girls and animals and anybody who's been involved in this, because it really is, it's a team effort. 2091 ruggedized SDI fiber connector got published. Well, hey, so you won't see that one next time around. And the 2108 ANC messages for high dynamic range and its sibling 2108 part 2, the KLV format for HDR messages. One of those have been published, and the other one's currently going through drafting. We have 2038, which is ANC packets in an MPEG-2 TS stream that's currently undergoing its pre-FCD comment resolution. And in the video over IP series, the 2110 series, part 22, which is how do you put constant bit rate compressed mono essence streams into the standard that's being drafted. How do you have a very high bandwidth single essence stream put over multiple lower bandwidth ports? That's currently being drafted. How do you put AES3 onto 2110? That's part 31, and that's been published. Again, many thanks to all the people in AES who helped us do that. This is a great example of Liaison working well with common people in common working groups doing a common standard so that we have one standard for the world and not different standards coming from different standards organizations. But more of that in 9 minutes time from Thomas. Timing of 2022 part 6 streams in 2110 systems. That's currently undergoing comment resolution. How do you do the switching of RTP datagrams? Has gone all the way through the process, ready for ST audit. And if you're putting VBR MPEG-2 transport streams in an IP network with no padding, how do you do that? Well, that's standard 2022 part 3 that's currently undergoing FCD comment resolution. There's 2081 and 2082. These are respectively the 6 gigabit per second and the 12 gigabit per second SDI streams. They exist in the dual link and the quad link variants, and both of those have been through their 1-year revision, and those are all 4 of them in FCD comment resolution, and they're kind of going through the standards process together as a clump. We have a working group on time labeling and synchronization. There's been no activity on the 2059 interoperability testing this time around, but you can find the old reports online to find out everything you need to know about how PTP and 2059 work in practice at those links there. And those are public reports, so those can be shared with anyone at all. So please do share them. We put them in the public domain so that people can learn about the reality of 2059. As a result of the work done there, there's going to be some revisions of 2059 Part 1 and 2. One is to remove a 5-second lockup time provision, and there's active discussion going on in the committees about things like the AES, Audio Engineering Society clock classes, what happens if you've got malformed TLV messages, and how does the alignment point work and what does it really mean in different rasters. So those are intellectual debates currently going on. There's some engineering guidelines for 2059. Part 11, well, its time came and went, so that project's going to be closed. Part 12 about the systemization considerations, that's probably going to be moved to 2110. And best practices for large-scale deployments, well, that's kind of been paused. And we think actually the new work on security might overshadow some of that work. That's my personal belief. The next gen of time code is called the Extensible Time Label, and several profiles are being considered: the digital birth certificate, local time profiles, and production time profiles, and work continues in that committee to try and define those profiles. RP2104, not much activity has happened for over 12 months in that particular committee. It might survive, it might not. And then there's lots of work going on about data being carried in ST337, and so there's quite a bit of work in the metadata groups and in this group about how that should be done. But that's kind of ongoing work. So I'm looking for a new chair. If you unmute, I promise not to make you the chair, but I will take questions on all things 32NF.
And we'll pause here for a moment to allow people to either say, I have an oral question, or to type in their question. At the moment, the queue is empty, but I'm going to keep talking just for a few more seconds, just in case people are typing away feverishly. And,
I think they've all gone to sleep with my lilting British accent. They're all waiting for Thomas. He's going to get the hard questions.
I have to say, your accent is quite comforting.
Yes. Yeah, don't drink and listen to Bruce. You will fall asleep. In 34CS, the Media Systems and Control, that's chaired by Chris Lennon and Carl Paulson. So this group looks after BXF, The latest Mxf v6 is now pretty much all in DP stage, draft publication, along with its schema document, which is a little bit further behind in FCD comment resolution. The Media Device Control Group, just like last time, they've got part 3 and 4, which is discovery and control. The focus of the DG really is to restructure, get the liaisons right, and finish those parts 3 and 4. That's the big push in that group. And the big new bit of work was on media services. We're working with Hunan TV, who've come forward with some proposals from China. And one of the questions was, how are we going to govern this? And so we've come up with an idea of creating some registers. If your microservice is defined by a standard, there'll be a register for that. If your microservice is defined by a recommended practice, there'll be a different register for that. If it's defined by an RDD or a TSP, there'll be a register for that. And if you're just a SMPTE member who wants to register something, there'll be a register for that as well. So the goal is to try and have a registry within SMPTE where we can actually help to manage the existing chaos of microservices, to try and give some formality and at the same time put forward some standards for microservices and some recommended practices. So this is still work in progress, and if this is key to your business or this is interesting to you, I do urge you to get in touch with myself or Thomas and figure out how you can join the standards community and help us make the microservices software element of the SMPTE standards the best on the planet. With that, I will then pause and see if there's any 34CS comments.
I do not see any questions at the moment. But I do have a question. In case there are people on the line who are not familiar with what a microservice is, would you be able to define the term?
Sure. We come from an era where software has tended to be somewhat monolithic in the broadcast industry. We all remember having to download Final Cut 7 and Adobe Premiere 6, and you'd have 2 DVDs that you would install on your PC, and this great monolithic lump would sit there unchanged for a very long time. We're also quite familiar that nowadays a modern web page might show a little pop-up where you can log in, and you're logged in without the page refreshing. That's brought to you because of the new software paradigm called microservices, where you define a service that just does a little bit of something. So it might be handling a single sign-on. It might be giving you a list of the directory services that are available in your Google Docs drive. It might be a list of all the ingest devices available to you in your plant. It might be a list of all the editing stations that are there. So these microservices tend to do one thing, and they tend to do it in a small fashion, and they do just that thing. And the advantage of that is it makes them very testable, but it does move the complexity to a higher level. And that's why you see a lot of work going on in terms of orchestration, enterprise service buses, and all sorts of different generations of technology for gluing these services together. But at the end of the day, we're moving to a kind of industry where an ingest port or a transcode port or a playout port or an origin server port can be abstracted and represented by a generically controlled microservice. So you can keep your microservice definition the same and have multiple instances of that microservice to build yourself a more scalable, more cloudy sort of plant. So that's what a microservice is. And SMPTE's got some big brains working on this. And if your brain's big and you're a specialist in this area, really, we do need you. So please get in touch. We'd love you to be part of our microservices group.
Very helpful. Thank you,
Joel.
Bruce.
Did that make any sense?
It certainly did.
Cool. So let's chug on. I've got one more committee to do, and then we can go into Thomas's lilting voice as opposed to my lilting voice. So, oops, sorry, I went a little bit too far there. So 35 p.m. is packaging and packaging of media. The chairs are Pierre-Anthony Lemieux and Florian Schleich. So this is the IMF group, basically. We've talked about the new projects. I've talked about the document maintenance group. So if you're a SMPTE standards community member and you're a member of 35 p.m, you can be granted access to the 35 p.m team on GitHub, and you can contribute and view and discuss all the various issues with the various SMPTE documents, so that we can keep a running list of all the things that we think are a bit fishy, that we can fix them all in one big go, and we can have an agile, scrummy sort of way of controlling these documents. So into the documents themselves, the dynamic metadata for color volume transformation, DMCVT, that's been published. In other words, how do you put things like Dolby Vision metadata into Mxf and use it in IMF? So that was a published document. A vocabulary for describing your audio element kinds. That's on hold because the work's probably going to carry on in 31FS 377 Part 4. That's being decided. The Immersive Audio Bitstream as a plugin, that's been elevated to DP vote. App2E has essentially swallowed App2, so there's now only going to be one application for everything J2K rather than two applications, so that's going to simplify the world. There's a way of having one XML document for every frame of an IMF video track. So that's that document, which is in ST Audit. And we've got a Plugfest coming up at the Pickford Center in LA on the 18th and 19th of October, where we're going to be concentrating on App2E, ProRes, IMSC1 and OPL. And I believe registration for that is open to SMPTE members, particularly 35PM members. And if you haven't signed up, you need to sign up today, otherwise you're going to miss it. The first of SMPTE's technical specifications is available at simpte.org/technical-specifications. You can click on the app DPP link and you can download all the documents. You can click on README and read the FAQ. And if you go to the app DPP page, you can click on the comments button and you can add your own comments to the document without even being a SMPTE member. And it's free. You don't have to be a SMPTE member or anything to get the documents. So this is something new from SMPTE, and I have to express my massive thanks to the neighbor people, the DPP people, all the members of TC35PM, and especially the 35PM chairs, without whom we couldn't have got this technical specification ready, and we certainly wouldn't have got to the stage where on the 11th of September we formalized the process and have published that process, and anyone who wants to make a specification can now get in touch with Thomas or myself and use that process to create specifications. So that brings me to the end of my session. Any comments on any of the work that SMPTE is currently doing before we move on to the liaison section?
We have currently no questions in the queue. So I would say we continue. And our next speaker is Mr. Thomas Bause Mason. He is the Director of Standards Development. Thomas, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Joel. I hope you can hear me well. And I have to say I'm overcoming a little bit of a cold. So once in a while I might cough a little bit. So please bear with me. I hope it's not too annoying. I'm going to talk about SMPTE liaisons, the process, and why we're doing liaisons and all this. So let's dive right into it. Let me see if I can get control. There we go. Okay, I'm just saying this is auto advancing. I hope that's not too annoying. So SMPTE is really a global organization. So our scope is Joel, the slides are auto advancing. Can you go? I think it has to do with a setting under the slideshow tab.
Would you like me to change that?
Yes, please. If you can go out of the slideshow mode.
Certainly.
Can I do it myself, or?
Yes, you can.
Yeah, you see that. Okay, that's the little setting. Which. There
you go.
Okay, let's start from where we were. Let's start over. Okay, this is the scope of SMPTE, the world basically, right? So, and even so, SMPTE might not necessarily be perceived as such. SMPTE is a global organization, and our standards are used across the world. And we have participants from across the world, Asia, Europe, the US. So it's quite an international group. And there are other organizations. SMPTE is working on standards using standards from other organizations, and other organizations are using SMPTE standards in developing their organizations. So we really want to play nice with these organizations. And what we really want to be, we want to be recognized as the authority on professional media. So if it's a professional production or a professional facility, distribution facility, that's where our technology sits, that's where our standards sit. And we want to make that known to other organizations. So we really want to be there to be recognized as the authority on professional media. But that's not all. We also want to make sure that whatever standards we develop, they're harmonized across the industry. So we have to make sure that whatever is happening in other organizations fits to what we are doing in our organization. And we also don't want to duplicate efforts and develop two different standards in two different organizations. So harmonization is really a core of why we're doing liaisons. And lastly, we also want to bring our expertise as the authority on professional media into other organizations. As I said before, be recognized and also explain our technology and in some cases bring some work back home and do work which usually, if the organization would have known, would have been done in an external organization and not in SMPTE. So I just recently went to a conference of a standards organization and introduced what SMPTE was doing. And there were 4 or 5 people who, after the session, came up to me and said, "Oh, I had no idea that you're doing this. This might be quite useful in our effort." So it's really, make known what SMPTE is doing and what SMPTE is about. So to enable liaisons, SMPTE has various documents. The main document is the operations manual, which some of you might know. For me, it became a Bible, I think for Bruce as well. So we live by the operations manual, and there's a whole section in there on liaisons and how you do liaisons and terminology and such. A few of these terms I'm going to explain in my little PowerPoint here. But there's also a more maybe internal document which is tracking what organizations we liaison with. That's AG 10A. That's a document where we actually have email addresses for the people we're interacting with in these organizations. And then there is AG10, and that is the list of all the organizations, again, we are liaising with, and their email address, their websites, actually. So, and what type of arrangement we have with them. There's also another AG, and by the way, AG stands for Administrative Guideline. Is really explaining parts of the OM and how you deal with parts of the OM. So AG10C is kind of a non-public hidden document because it actually contains names of the person we are dealing with at other organizations. So there's a whole variety of organizations we have liaisons with, and I'm going to address some of these liaisons later in this PowerPoint. Get into the tracking of liaison activities. We have a liaison committee with a chair, and the chair is tracking whatever is going on in SMPTE in regards to liaisons on Trello. Trello is a kind of a project management system with boards and cards and lists, and as you can see here, and that's a way for us to make sure that we're not missing out on any actions for liaison communication. This is the first explanation of a term. We have usually a group of people in an external organization who is interested in technology. SMPTE is developing standards, SMPTE is developing. So this delegation can assign what is called a head of delegation. That is just a spokesperson, basically, and we call it HOD, hot, I guess. So that's really the person who's interacting with SMPTE. To do this communication, We determine these delegates. We have the HOT on the external organization side, and then we have a person, either somebody who was appointed by the by the standards vice president, or the vice president, standards vice president itself, who is going to do the communication. And so these people, are going to exchange emails or documents. Liaison communication can be anything, really. It should be written down, so it can be either a physical letter, or it can be an email, or it can be an electronic letter attached to an email. So there are various forms how you can communicate. A little bit explaining the process itself. If an organization, external organization, wants to communicate with SMPTE, they send us an incoming liaison request that goes to either the SMPTE delegate or through the SMPTE standards vice president. And we review it and then send it on to the liaison committee, or ST, and that will be put into a liaison's record, which is either the Trello board if we have to do certain actions, or there is these AG10 ABC documents where we record what liaison we have with that organization. So usually we would go in there and look up if we get an incoming liaison request, do we have a liaison with that organization? If not, then we establish that, and then we can have this communication. So the liaison committee, or ST, will discuss this liaison and then may draft a response. Not every incoming liaison will trigger an outgoing liaison and a response. Sometimes it's just a notification making us aware of things which are happening in an external organization, so we know about it. And but sometimes there's also a call for action where this external organization wants SMPTE to do something, or they want to exchange documents or such. So in that case, we create an outgoing liaison. The SMPTE standards vice president approves it, and then out it goes to the external organization. So we not necessarily always do the liaison communication in the liaisons committee, or ST. Sometimes we also reach out to our technology committee chairs, and they in turn can reach out to their membership to discuss an incoming liaison, and may also draft a response, which then goes back to the liaison committee, or ST. And then it goes to the process I already explained. So in some cases, it might be important for a TC chair or for the members of a TC to initiate a liaison. So they're going to get together and draft a liaison correspondence, send it to the liaison committee and ST. It will be discussed there, and then once there's all general agreement, it goes to the SMPTE vice president for approval, and then will be sent out to the external organization. So that might sometimes may trigger a response. It may not trigger a response. Sometimes it just goes in a black hole, and we don't hear anything. But if there's something coming back, it goes through the usual process, as I explained before, to the SMPTE vice president or the SMPTE delegate, and then from there to the liaison committee, and then ST, and then from there back to the TC chair. There are occurrences, and Bruce, maybe you correct me if this is wrong, but I think there are also occurrences where you can make the TC chairs correspond directly with the external organization.
Yes, that's true. I mean, basically, we have this formal process so that the communications are the communications of the will of SMPTE rather than the views of an individual. But sometimes the chair is the expert, and just to get that fast turnaround, we can delegate to the TC chair. The SVP is the person nominally responsible, so if it all goes wrong, it all comes back to me, but that rarely happens, and pretty much we can delegate to somebody who's trustworthy and knowledgeable.
Yeah, and I think important is that we have a record of the liaison, so this liaison record is the important point for us. Okay, any questions so far?
There are no questions in the queue at this time, Thomas.
Okay. So this is the next term I wanted to explain. There's also a liaison rapporteur. That is maybe an easier way for doing a liaison. It is basically you have an external organization, and they decide that one of them will be part of the discussion in SMPTE. So that person will join the meetings at SMPTE and then report back to that external organization. You can do liaison requests and liaison communication and exchange email. The gist of a discussion in a SMPTE group may not be captured in that. So if you really want to know what's going on in a development of a standard or a recommended practice or any other document, you should be part of the discussion and join the meeting. Maybe not in person, you can do it remotely, and then you can report back to your organization. The problem is sometimes if you don't join these meetings, the meeting minutes are not very detailed. They just capture action items and decisions in most cases, so you're not going to get any information on what actually happened in the discussion out of meeting minutes. So it's recommended that you be part of the discussion. Moving on, let's look at some of the organizations we got involved with, we have liaisons with. And one of the groups which is quite prominent and plays a lot into what we're doing in terms of media over IP is the Joint Task Force on Network Media. We are one of the founders of this group. So there's two different groups actually. There's the JTNM admin. That's the administrative group. Those are the founders and the board of the JTNM. Basically consisting of the delegates of the EBU, SMPTE, AMWA, or VSF, and they're discussing different efforts in different organizations there and how to react. So the JTNM was really put in place to help manage the transition from SDI to IP and to collect user requirements, identify gaps in technology and standards, and then recommend best practices or craft reports on certain technology which may be required. You may be familiar with the JTM went through different phases, phase 1, 2, and 3. I believe phase 1 was the reference architecture. That is kind of like a reference architecture of how to build a media over IP system. And that was based on user requirement gathering, exactly these 3 steps, collecting user requirements, identifying gaps in the technology, and then recommend best practices or actions in these 4 different organizations. So best example is the PTP security study group Bruce just mentioned earlier. That was really based on an effort in EBU and AMWA. They looked at different security test cases. They compiled a document which went to the JTNM admin group. There it was decided we should look at how to protect PTP infrastructure first, and then SMPTE picked that up, founded a study group, and we're going to report back to them on what we're going to find. So this group meets every 4 weeks, so almost every month. And but there's a second group and a bit larger group, which is the Jdm Coordinator Group. And you see there are a few more organizations involved here beside the founding organizations, EBU, AMWA, SMPTE, and VSF. We also have AIMS, which is an industry forum supporting the adoption of ST 2110. We have IABM, which is a group who's representing equipment manufacturers. We have AES, the Audio Engineering Society, which takes care of audio and does an audio over IP standard. And then we have NEBA, which is the North American equivalent to the EBU, the North American Broadcasters Association. It's a user group, and so they're part of this coordinator group as well. So they also talk about what's going on in the industry, but more to update each other on ongoing projects to make sure that there's no duplicated efforts, and coordinate the industry activities to make sure we all on the same page, and that the work is done in the appropriate organization. This group meets every 4 weeks, and we have quite an extensive exchange there. And it usually meets a week after the admin meeting, so we can communicate whatever was discussed in the admin meeting in the coordinator meeting. And this is just an output out of this work as well. You might be familiar with this. This is the Jdm Roadmap, and you can see how the different organizations which are represented in the Jdm are represented on this chart. It really shows like a temporal development of standards. We have SMPTE on the bottom together with AES, and then we have AMWA in there as well, EBU, and then there's some discussion at Jdm about security recommendations. And this graphic really gives you a good idea on where the Jdm thinks the industry is at the moment in regards to adoption and development of different standards document. So really meant to harmonize what all the different organizations are doing and putting it into a time context, right? So the next group we're talking about is a much bigger group. It's called the Inter-SDO Meetup. SDO stands for Standards Development Organization, and this is really a meetup of a global range of different organizations involved in media and writing media standards or specifications. I put quite a few up here. These are not by no way all of them. I think you probably can add another double the amount of groups which are involved in this effort. But you can see we have very different organizations in there. W3C, 3GPP deals with standardization for 3G, 4G, and 5G infrastructure. The EBU we know, SMPTE we know, CTA, the Consumer Technology Association. Then we have AMWA and VSF in there, but we also have broadcast-related organizations, distribution organizations like the DVB, the European Broadcasting System, and ATSC, the North American Broadcasting System, but also organizations which describe very fundamental technologies, standardize very fundamental technology like MPEG and W3C. We have some industry forums as well. There's the Media Coding Industry Forum, MCIF, and we have the Virtual Reality Industry Forum, VRIF. And then we have the Ultra High Definition Forum in there as well. So it's quite an eclectic group of people, and they're coming together 3 times a year during the major industry events, CES, NAB, and IBC. It's a face-to-face meeting, a room full of people who are working in media on all different aspects of media. We're talking about updates on the structure and working methods in these organizations. There are some topics where we talk about how we can harmonize how we develop standards. Then we talk about new matters for standards, what technologies are out there which would warrant standardization. We talked a bit about 5G, virtual reality, augmented reality. We had discussion about blockchain and so on. So it's a whole list of technology topics which are being discussed. And organizations, not that we are determining who's doing what, but organizations can say, well, this is an area I'm really interested in, and I'm going to do something there, and you should know about it, and maybe we can work together on this. There's strategic updates from the standards bodies. That's exactly that. You know, what are we doing, and who can help, and who should we work together with? So it's a quite interesting group, and it's going on now for quite a few years. I think 5-6 years now. The last meeting we had at IBC was well attended, and we had a really good discussion. And actually, we ran out of time at the end of a 4-hour meeting, I believe. So quite interesting. Going more into specific relationships we have, there is the relationship we have with the Association of Radio Industries and Businesses, ARIBE. That's a national Japanese organization involved in standards development. And they also do some research and development, working with NHK, for example, on new technology trends. You're aware that Japan in 2020 will do 8K broadcast of the Olympics. So that's obviously a big topic for them. But they're really interested in harmonizing what they are doing in their standards development work with other organizations, for example, SMPTE. Hence, they approached us, and their interest at the moment, at least, is in SMPTE ST 2110 and what we are doing there. And they're hoping that they can adopt the SMPTE standard as their standard as well. So a bit of harmonization we did there. The next organization I want to talk about is the Advanced Television Systems Committee, ATSC. You may know them. It's the North American Broadcast System, digital television. It's a standards development organization. It's US-based, but operates internationally. There are some countries who are adopting ATSC. That's namely South Korea, I believe, and there are some countries in South America. But they are kind of like on the receiving end what SMPTE does. So a lot of the SMPTE standards will affect what ATSC is doing in broadcasting. So they're interested in harmonizing what their standards development is with the SMPTE one, and make sure that these technologies work with each other. And SMPTE actually there is a board member, so we go to the board meetings. The next one is actually happening tomorrow, so I'm going to be on that meeting as well. And whenever we can, from the SMPTE side, we support what ATSC is doing. Going on to the European Broadcasting Union, EBU. It's a user community. It represents public broadcasters in Europe. If you're familiar with Europe, public broadcasters there are very strong, very different to what's happening here in the US. So there's quite a eclectic group, a big group of people represented by the EBU. I think the EBU also does some own programming. The most famous one is, I think, the Eurovision Song Contest. So if you are into music, you might be aware of that. So the EBU is doing the production, I believe, and also the broadcasting. They're involved in research and development, so they have groups working on new technology developments, 5K, 5G, sorry, and IMF, HDR, and how it plays into broadcasting in Europe. So quite an active group, quite a big group, and they see SMPTE as their place to do standardization of their efforts. So SMPTE is their standards organization. And we're currently working on a memorandum of understanding, MOU, with the EBU to deepen our cooperation. And topics of interest, among others, are IMF, SMPTE ST 2110, and then the PTP security we discussed earlier. Here's another one, Audio Engineering Society, also very close relationship we have with them. It's an international standards organization focusing exclusively on audio. So a lot of audio work is happening there. And one of the main pieces is probably AES 67 at the moment. And if you're following the SMPTE ST 2110 effort, then you will know that dash 30 is an adoption of AES 67. And then we also work together on PTP. If you followed the SMPTE SD 2059 development, we had quite a few discussions with the AES, and AES has their own PTP profile, and we worked with AES on harmonizing the SMPTE 2059 profile with the AES 67 profile. So there's some discussion also on discovery and registration. and a brand new discussion we just started, and we will see where that goes, is a discussion on object models, specifically for device control over IP, connection management, and related topics. Lastly, I think, is the Ultra HD Forum, UHDF, not to be mistaken with the Ultra HD Alliance. That's a different group. The Ultra HD Forum is an international industry forum to support the adoption of UHD TV, meaning high resolution, higher frame rates, HDR, and wide color gamut. And they're writing guidelines for the industry on how to use UHD TV. And they represent content creators, equipment manufacturers in consumer and business equipment, and also distributors of content. So also quite an active and large group. Apologies. And they're looking for a consensus on common technical standards, and SMPTE is created quite a few standards which play into this area. So there's a memorandum of understanding in progress as well here to harmonize what is happening in the forum with SMPTE standards, and also enable the exchange of documents. So the UHD forum can look at SMPTE standards. This is a full list of organizations we have liaisons with. Some are older, some are newer. I probably mentioned most of them already. We are quite involved with the ISO, IEC. We have liaisons with different groups in the ISO. We are also involved through ANSI in specifically the TC36 as the ANSI secretariat for that group. So there are quite not many calls, but some calls I have to attend as the secretary. Luckily, ANSI is taking care of doing the actual work. So I'm just an educated listener, let's say. There is SCTE, DVS, I haven't mentioned them. VSF, obviously, we have quite a good relationship with as well. ST2110 is based on technical recommendation from the VSF. DPP, that's the Digital Production Partnership in the UK, which worked with us on the first technical specification in SMPTE. And then CTA, I mentioned the Blu-ray Disc Association, and so on. So it's in a quite eclectic list of organizations. But I also want to mention some of the SMPTE conferences we are involved with. We are there, we are present, we have sometimes booths there. The biggest event is coming up now. I think it starts not next week, the following week. Is the SMPTE ATC, the annual technical conference in Los Angeles. So that's our biggest event. And we have now, I think, 3 different tracks at the conference. It's growing. But we also present at IBC and NAB. We hosting conference sessions there. So if you go to these organizations and look at the program, you will find SMPTE sessions there. We have booths at the IBC and NAB, so you can find us there in person. If you have any concerns, any questions, you can find us there in person, face to face, and ask about technology or how to become a member. There are other events where we are involved, but maybe on a smaller scale. There's the EBUTA, where we go to represent and present on what's happening in SMPTE, update the EBU. TA stands for the Technical Assembly, so it's the main technical event, similar to the ATC. We just started to go, well, actually, we're going to SET quite a bit. It's an Society of Television Engineers in Brazil. And then we have NAB East, where we are represented as well, and we have sessions. There's GV Expo. I think that's a fairly new effort where we're present as SMPTE and represent SMPTE. And then we also engage with our SMPTE local chapters, and to be there, we often send delegates to give presentations on what's happening in SMPTE, on specific technology, and so on. So we also try to host our TC meetings with these local chapters. So, you know, that's why we often go to the EBU in Switzerland or England to support our local chapter in England, and so on. We have chapters in Italy, France, I believe, Russia. So quite a few countries we have now local chapters. That is it. I think I hope I gave you a pretty good overview of why we're doing liaisons, how we are doing liaisons, and who we are doing liaisons with. And I thank you for taking the time to listen.
And thank you, Thomas. I think you did a very good job of explaining what the liaison process is. Now, I think we have a couple of things that we need to do there, Bruce. One is a poll, and would you like me to put that poll up on the screen for now?
Yes, please. If you put the poll up, and then we'll take some questions, and people can click on one of the three buttons so that Thomas and I know what we're doing next time. Thank you.
Very good. And the poll will be, as soon as I am able to click on it, the poll will be for you to select what the next deep dive topic will be. So you can do that, and we are collecting responses at the moment. And while people are submitting their votes, I do want to take a moment to let you know about 3 webcasts that we are working to deliver to you. These are technology series webcasts. The beginning of November, we have Mr. Mark Shubin, who will be presenting 6 centuries of opera and media technology in New York. That will be presented in conjunction with the New York section. Later in the month, the future of VR technology, and then even later in the month of November, we will have a webcast on 5G technology, and we're looking to present specifically the impact that it may have on broadcasters, but we'll find out how 5G works. And again, the responses to the poll are coming in. They're starting to slow down a little bit. And let's see. You tell me when. They're still having a few responses come in. You tell me when you would like to see the results.
Do we have any questions on liaisons or standards in general, or the performance of the Australian cricket team? We'll take all of those questions.
Yes, and there are no questions in the queue at the moment, but please, while the poll is active, go ahead and post any questions that you might have. And I do have a question. In one of the organizations in which SMPTE is involved, I saw the abbreviation VRIF. What is that organization? Does anybody know?
Do you want to take that one, Thomas?
Yeah, sure. It's the Virtual Reality Industry Forum.
I thought so. So there is an organization that is looking at VR and standardization.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm not sure what the actual working is, what they're doing in there. I think there was some report we exchanged because we have a study group on VR and AR.
All right. The results have stopped. Would you like to share the
oh, yes, please.
outcomes? And this is what people have said. It is not too big a spread, but
oh, that's a lot closer than I thought it was going to be, actually. So
yeah.
Microservices, excellent. Mm-hmm. So I think Mr. Lennon is going to be joining us next time round. That'll be quite exciting, actually.
And it will be a pleasure to see him. We haven't seen him on a webcast for a while.
Absolutely. I will try and nail him to his calendar so he can't move. I'll do my best.
Very good. Well, that is, in fact, There are no questions. Those are the results of the poll. So I would like to thank you, Bruce. Thank my colleague on staff, Thomas. Bause Mason.
There I am.
There you are.
Three.
I'd also like to thank our guests for hanging around with us right until the very, 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 very end of the webcast. And all of you, take care. If you're traveling, safe travels. And we'll see you next time on the SMPTE webcast. Bye-bye.
Ciao, folks.
See you later.
See ya.